Module 1, Unit 2, the Transformative Agenda and the Cluster Approach. This unit will help you to understand the recent evolution of the humanitarian system, especially since the humanitarian reform in 2005, be familiar with the 3 pillars of the transformative agenda, understand the principles of the cluster approach. Daniel has heard a lot about the WASH platform coordination, also called cluster approach in emergency, in the context of coordination, but he's not sure what it exactly means and involves. Louise is happy to help him with this topic.
Hi Louise, I will need your help to understand the last evolutions of the coordination mechanisms and how it works with the coordination platform.
No problem, Daniel. Let us look at a nice presentation I have about the transformative agenda and the cluster approach. We also call it coordination platform in certain contexts.
The humanitarian reform process was prompted by significant changes in humanitarian operations, with an ever-increasing number of humanitarian actors, greater competition for funding and resources, increased public scrutiny, and the changing role of the United Nations. This led to a humanitarian response review in 2005, undertaken by the Interagency Standing Committee. The main objective of the reform was to improve the effectiveness of humanitarian response through greater predictability, accountability, responsibility, and partnership. However, challenges still remain in deploying adequate leadership, especially during Level 3 emergency, putting in place appropriate coordination mechanisms at various levels, and ensuring clear mutual accountabilities as evidenced by several major disasters over the past years. That is the reason why, building on the lessons learned in 2010 and 2011, the EASC principals decided to review the current approach to humanitarian response and make adjustments. Based on analysis of current challenges to leadership and coordination, the EASC principals agreed in December 2011 to a set of actions that collectively represent the substantive improvement to the current humanitarian response model. Following the agreement of the Transformative Agenda, the TA, in December 2011, the principals agreed the TA protocols, which set the parameters for improved collective action in humanitarian emergencies. The protocols include the following documents: The transformative agenda is based on 3 pillars. Leadership. This pillar encompasses ensuring proper and effective leadership in a Level 3 emergency. In this case, the humanitarian coordinator will have more authority. He or she will be supported by a team of experts that will be deployed from the Interagency Rapid Response Team. The team will include cluster coordinators, additional OCHA capacity, and other technical expert support for assessment, information management, strategic planning, and flash appeal development. The second pillar is coordination. The activation of the cluster approach will be more strategic and be activated if HC and HCT deem it necessary. It will focus on results, not on the process. Other elements of the coordination agenda relate to minimum commitments for cluster participation, formulated by the NGO, consortia, and adopted by the EASC, and strengthening NGO representation in the humanitarian country team, HCT. Finally, accountability. EASC principals agreed on the use of common tools to manage each phase of the humanitarian cycle programme from needs assessments to reporting. This will include an initial rapid multi-cluster needs assessment to identify main needs of affected populations in order to provide overall vision and initial priorities. The EASC and all of the stakeholders involved are committed to be accountable to the affected population. As described, one of the pillars of the transformative agenda is coordination. It is recognised that effective coordination is essential to respond to humanitarian needs and to maximise the use of scarce resources. However, in the past this has been quite weak due to limited responsibility and accountability for coordination. The cluster approach, or coordination platform, has been introduced to address this limitation through designated cluster lead agencies at global and country levels. The EASC guidance note on using the cluster approach to strengthen humanitarian response provides further detail. Cluster are agreed by the Interagency Standing Committee and have clear responsibilities for coordination. The approach is used in case of all major new emergencies requiring a wide-ranging international response, Level 3, in all countries with a humanitarian coordinator, in all contingency planning for emergencies. Where the host government supports this approach, although government approval is not required. You are now probably wondering what's the difference between a cluster and a sector. For the purposes of this description, sectoral crisis coordination mechanisms are led by government and report to the designated government bodies. A formally activated cluster system usually reports to the HC and HCT and other forms of humanitarian coordination. It is a temporary coordination solution, only used when the capacity of existing coordination and response mechanisms are overwhelmed or constrained in their ability to appropriately respond to needs according to humanitarian principles. In some countries, coordination mechanisms are referred to as clusters, although there is no formally activated cluster approach. In essence, the name of the coordination mechanism does not matter, but a formally activated cluster has specific characteristics and accountabilities. It is, however, important to note that where leadership and accountability for coordination and response mechanisms remain within government, this does not restrict augmenting this with additional coordination capacity. For more information on how the EASC defines the difference between the cluster and the already existing coordination platform, you can refer to the EASC Cluster Coordination Reference Module 2 in the Resources folder. In the context of this course, we will use cluster and/or WASH coordination platform with no differentiation, as this is country-specific. Clusters are groups of humanitarian organisations, both UN and non-UN, responding in each of the main sectors requiring humanitarian action. There are 11 global clusters in line with sectors or areas of activities, such as agriculture and livelihood, education, shelter, early recovery, camp coordination, food security, health, logistics, nutrition, protection, and WASH. All clusters have lead organisations known as cluster lead agencies, which operate at the global and country level. The lead agencies are responsible for strengthening system-wide preparedness and coordinating technical capacity to respond to humanitarian emergencies in their respective sector. The WASH cluster is led by UNICEF. Although the UNHCR has a lead role in Protection Cluster, it is important to note that in a refugee context, UNHCR has a mandated responsibility to lead and coordinate international action to refugee needs, and clusters are not established in this context. The different actors involved are at a global level, but also at a national level. Firstly, at global level are the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, which is a branch of the UN Secretariat, created specifically to improve coordination between UN agencies and other organisations in areas affected by humanitarian crises. OCHA is not normally present in stable countries and intervenes only at the onset of a crisis that requires the joint effort of several UN agencies. The Emergency Relief Coordinator, the ERC, who is the head of the OCHA, the chair of the EASC, and reports to the UN Secretary-General, the ERC is responsible for the global coordination of humanitarian assistance. The Interagency Standing Committee, the EASC, that comprises major humanitarian actors including key UN agencies, IOM, the Red Cross movement, and 3 international NGOs. It is important to note that the Red Cross is seated at the EASC as an observer. The UN Disaster Assessment and Coordination Team, UNDAC, which is a standby team of disaster management professionals. This team can be deployed within hours if requested by the RC or host government to carry out rapid assessments, establish cross-sector coordination and information management systems, and to support national authorities and the RC and HC in coordinating the international response. The Global Cluster Lead Agency, that, as I mentioned before, is the designated agency responsible in each cluster for ongoing standards and policy setting, building response capacity and operational support. Finally, the Global Cluster itself, which is made up of members of EASC and other humanitarian actors, including NGOs, the Red Cross movement, UN agencies, consortia, institutions and donors, all with an interest and expertise in that sector. Secondly, at national level, the structure at country might vary from one country to another, but it mainly includes, as the state is responsible first and foremost to take care of the victims of national disasters and other emergencies occurring in its territory. The government has a primary role in organising the humanitarian assistance in a disaster. The Resident Coordinator, or RC, who is typically the most senior UN representative in country and represents all organisations of the UN, with a mandate to coordinate their activities. The RC chairs the UN country team and is appointed by the Secretary-General. The RC is responsible for interagency coordination in the initial response to a rapid onset emergency. The UN country team, or the UNCT, includes representatives of the operational UN agencies already resident in the country and is chaired by the RC. Its role in major new emergencies is limited, with primary responsibility being undertaken by a broad-based humanitarian country team, HCT, from the earliest stage. The Humanitarian Coordinator, or HC, whose overall responsibility is ensuring coherence of relief efforts in country, chairs the Humanitarian Country Team, works closely with the RC and is responsible to the Emergency Relief Coordinator. The appointment of an HC signals the need for a long-term humanitarian presence in the country. The Humanitarian Country Team, HCT, is composed of the cross-sectoral EASC representatives who are in country responding to a disaster. Also known as the EASC Country Team or Task Force, the Humanitarian Country Team has overall responsibility for mounting a coordinated humanitarian response. the country cluster lead agency is appointed by the HC and takes responsibility for ensuring effective leadership and coordination of a particular cluster at country level. The cluster partners are all those involved in the humanitarian response and who have expertise, resources or information to support the relevant sector.
Thank you very much, Louise. All this is very interesting. With all those elements, I could prepare a short presentation about the humanitarian reform and the cluster approach. What do you think?
Good idea, Daniel.